Thousands of Eritrean refugees in Ethiopia's Tigray region have become the latest targets in the bloody crisis between the separatist TPLF and the federal government. The UNHCR says at least 24,000 Eritreans, many of whom fled their country's authoritarian government long before the war in Tigray, are facing intimidation and harassment from militant groups. The refugee agency says at least 2 people have been killed in the Mayani and Adi Harush camps in Tigray's Maisebri area, where the refugees have been sheltering. Both camps have now been cut off from humanitarian assistance. The attack is the latest in a series of setbacks for humanitarian organizations trying to reach more than 5 million people in desperate need of aid in Tigray. On Wednesday, the World Food Programme said it will run out of food stockpiles on Friday if 170 trucks of supplies stuck in the neighboring Afar region are not allowed to leave immediately. Now, there have been reports of fighting in Afar, which straddles multiple key trade routes into Ethiopia, and in the neighboring Amhara region, where the government is mobilizing armed residents against the TPLF. The rise in regional rebellion signals a new phase in the 8-month-long conflict, despite Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed's unilateral ceasefire in Tigray last month. The TPLF recently listed federal transitional arrangements and an inclusive political process as major preconditions for a ceasefire. William Davison is a senior analyst for Ethiopia at the International Crisis Group. He's been monitoring the situation in Tigray closely, and he joins me now from Cambridge, UK. Thanks a lot for joining us. Aid blockade remains a challenge in Tigray, and now we're hearing of targeted attacks on refugee camps in the region. What more can you tell us about the situation on the ground, William?
The situation on the ground is that the Tigrayan forces have responded to, effectively a federal government blockade on Tigray after federal forces withdrew in late June. The Tigrayan forces have responded by going on the offensive. They are going on the offensive to the east and south through Afar region and also into northern Amhara region. The objective seems to be to increase the pressure on the Ethiopian federal government and to force them to negotiating table, end the blockade, restore humanitarian access, restore telecoms and power to Tigray. And it's in the midst of these types of developments, there are reports of attacks on some of the Eritrean refugees by Tigrayan militia, but at the moment it is hard to establish the facts and the details about those incidents.
That's right, but the TPLF clearly wants aid to reach Tigray. But there have been conflicting reports on who is responsible for the attacks on aid convoys trying to reach the region. What more can you tell us?
The difficulty here is that the aid organizations such as World Food Programme, the key organization in this instance, publicly, they need to work with the Ethiopian government. But the WFP privately is very clear that their convoy was attacked by a local Afar militia and not by the Tigrayan forces, as the federal government claims. Now, it's hard to establish, of course, who exactly committed that attack or ordered it. But it does fit into the context of the federal government restricting humanitarian access and essentially cutting off Tigray ever since the federal withdrawal in an attempt to pressure Tigray's leaders. And the response of Tigray's leaders, as mentioned, has been to go on the offensive to try and break that blockade and put the pressure back on Prime Minister Abiy and his allies in Addis Ababa.
And there have been reports of deadly fighting in Amhara, Afar, and Ethiopia, Somali region. You mentioned Afar earlier. What's responsible for the rising regional rebellion we're witnessing in Ethiopia?
The key rebellion at the moment is the activity of the Tigrayan forces. That's led to tens of thousands of people displaced in Afar, undoubtedly violence and displacement in Amhara as well, although we've not heard too many details about that. Ethiopia generally is also unstable with other pockets of violence, political discontent and insurgencies such as in Oromia and Benishangul Gumuz region. Now, just in one of those incidents, a territorial dispute between the Afar and the Somali has flared up recently, causing serious violence. That is very significant because that also interrupts the Addis to Djibouti trade route, and interrupting that trade route is one of the targets of the Tigrayan forces to try and increase the pressure on Addis Ababa.
On Tuesday, the TPLF listed federal transitional arrangements and inclusive political process as another major preconditions for a ceasefire. What do you think that would entail, and how do you see the federal government respond to this?
Looks like a toughening of the Tigrayan position, where talking about transitional arrangements, they're essentially calling for Abiy to step aside. Now, that's obviously a very tough demand, one that the Prime Minister will not be looking to accede to. But I think it does reflect the military position, and that's why we're seeing an increasing hardening of the Tigrayan stance. I think, therefore, as a consequence of this, what we need to happen is for Prime Minister Abiy to acknowledge the military situation, acknowledge the strength of the Tigrayan forces, and come to the negotiating table with them. That way, perhaps we can establish a ceasefire and humanitarian access. But there is the very thorny issue of Western Tigray, where Amhara forces and federal forces are still present, and Amhara region claims as its own. That is still a very controversial issue that is going to be hard to resolve.
William Davison, a senior analyst for Ethiopia at the International Crisis Group. That's Africa Matters for today. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you next week.